So thank you guys all for being here. Simona, would you want to start off with an intro about yourself and your company, and then we can move on to John's intro as well before we get started with the questions?
Sure. Good afternoon, Amina. It's nice to be here. My name is Simona Agalini. I am the CEO and co-founder of a company called Kids. Kids is a marketplace that basically connects parents and leisure and entertainment and after school vendors so that parents can find, plan, book fun things to do with their families. We launched in the UAE. We have since expanded into Saudi. We have a digital presence in Bahrain, and we have a digital presence in Egypt. And yeah, I'm very happy to be here today.
Excellent. Simona, I've been following your KSA activity. I followed the Vision VC investors, so they've been very active in sharing your activity. So that's been very exciting. You guys are doing an amazing job.
Thank you.
John, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hello, good afternoon. My name is John. I am one of the co-founder of Denarii. What we do, basically, Denarii enables money transfer using a mobile app, a web, and an API to help consumer, businesses, and fintech to send money internationally. I'm super excited to be part of this call, and happy to share my fundraising journey and anything that I could help. So yeah.
Excellent. So I want to jump into the topic of fundraising. So for a lot of us, because fundraising has been in the news lately, so it's, everyone is fundraising. You see these numbers, it always seems so glamorous and everyone's so excited about it and wants to share it as a success. But what do you guys, if we had to go and speak about it honestly, what do you guys think about the fundraising scene today in startups? What are your thoughts on it?
I'm happy to go first. I think, and John, please feel free to compliment. I think that as a founder, there's many things that you don't know because you're doing something for the first time. It's your first time of starting, first time founders. Of course, you can have second time, third time, fourth time founders, but I'm talking about the people who are doing it first time. There's many things you don't know, and fundraising is one of them that you don't know. And I think that there's so much, as you maybe said, I mean, not hype out there, but you see all the success stories. You don't see all the hard work and slog that goes behind fundraising and finding the right people and getting that first person to actually believe in what your product and so on. So I think that you have a developing and quite active funding scene here in the region, and it's growing rapidly. You've got a lot of new VCs coming on the scene. You have a lot of new products coming on the scene. You've got crowdfunding. You have different types of platforms. So there's a lot going on. But as a first-time founder, I've got lots of tips and lots of things that I can share with people as we go through.
Excellent.
I completely agree with Simona, right? The way I look at fundraising, it's very tiring. It's very exhausting. There's a lot of preparation. So what you typically see out there from the media, from WAMDA, or Minabytes, for instance, is just the end result of the long process of the fundraising. So the good thing is basically it's not difficult to fundraise now compared 5 years, 6 years ago. Like what Simona have mentioned, there are more programs or options out there where you can do a fundraising, right? So be it in Bahrain, for instance, like the Hope Fund, and be it in Saudi or be it in the UAE, I think there's a lot of optionality now for founders. Previously, the way I see it in fundraising, VC typically dictates the terms because there's not a lot of options for founders to raise money, right? But now what we're seeing more and more founders that actually can have an optionality to choose which VC or which partner to work on. Because this support that we're getting from different institutions actually allows us to have this optionality as a founder when fundraising.
Okay, excellent. I think you guys mentioned some a key kind of point is that how exhausting fundraising actually is. So how is it like to fundraise? Like if you had to describe the experience of fundraising, what does that look like for someone who has never done it before?
I think, yeah, sorry, Simona, let me jump on. I think for us, we're very fortunate because we came from an accelerator program, which is 500 startup. And kind of they gave us already like kind of a playbook, if you like, or a guidance of how to structure your fundraising. But when we joined the program prior to that, we don't really have an idea. Like again, similar like what Simona mentioned earlier, is like as a first-time founder, from the fundraising perspective, you don't know where to start and how to start, right? So when we joined 500 Startup, they gave us all these stepping stone or steps or process to follow to do the fundraising. So a couple of things that I could easily mention is basically the first thing in the list is preparation and practice, right? So from the preparation perspective is making sure that you have the story to tell to the investors, prepare the pitch deck, know your numbers by heart, know the business, and then practice, right? So I think that's the two key main thing. Initially, I guess that's most needed when you are fundraising. I guess there's a caveat on that one because it depends on what stage of the journey of your company building you're doing. If you are when you're probably in your seed stage, probably that's what you need. But if you are on a Series A or Series B or Series C, then it's a completely different journey of doing a fundraising.
Okay. And how do you view it, Simona?
So I think one of the first tips that is, I think, a very good one to share that John mentioned is that as a startup, I think it's very beneficial to try to get into one of those programs, an accelerator, relatively early on. Of course, you know, there's always hurdles. There's always applications you have to do. Maybe you're not at the right stage, you're at an idea generation stage, or you're at a pre-revenue stage, or pre-product, or whatever. There's many different stages. But I think that if you can get onto a credible accelerator, I think it's really, really invaluable for a startup, because it does help you it provides you with a lot of the information that you need to build your business, whether it's on the funding or whether it's on the tools that you should be and the frameworks that you should be using, whether it's on preparing your pitch deck, practicing your pitch. So all of those things, which maybe when you're first starting to get your business up and running, you think, I don't have the time for this. And this is actually what happened to us. I don't think we have the time for this, but we still went on it. That I think was very, very beneficial. And I would highly recommend it to startups to see about getting on programs. And there's so many programs out there nowadays. There's programs across the board. So you don't get into one, you apply to another, but all of them will have many of those tools in place. In terms of the exhaustion related to fundraising, it's just a very long process. It's repetitive because you're telling the same story again. You're having to build relationships with investors. Sometimes it's a cold call, like they've never heard of you before, and they get 1,000 of those cold calls. So how are you going to stand out? Other times when you've nurtured that relationship and you've kept them updated over the period of time, let's say it's, whether it's a year or however long it is, it's a much easier call, but you still have to go and you still have to retell the story. And you still have to convince them about why you and why your business. And people say to you, like I've heard a lot of comments. Yeah, it doesn't matter if you're pre-revenue. It doesn't matter about the idea. It's about the founding team. It doesn't matter about. I can promise you that all of that's not true. All of those things matter. They all come together, but they all matter.
I agree.
Yeah, I think a misconception also comes because when we see those stories without the back end of it. So for example, we would see a company, like we'd see news about a company that fundraises $3 million, but then they're pre-revenue, or then a founder that raises $1 million, but with no product. So they might be pre-products or pre-revenue. So then it seems easier on the outside. You guys mentioned, so let's take it a step back. So you guys mentioned two very important points. You mentioned the programs and accelerators, and you mentioned building that relationship. Now, with programs, a lot of founders are hesitant because it's a fixed percentage equity stake. It's a big time commitment. So, and a lot of these founders don't want that fixed valuation or that fixed equity stake. They feel like it's unfair, like they're taking a hit on their cap table very early on. So how would you guys reflect on that? What are like the pros and cons of it, or do the pros outweigh the cons of it?
So I'll take that one. I think if I were to reflect back on our personal fundraising journey, I think one of the things I would do differently if I was doing it again is I would raise less at a lower valuation early on, and then I would raise a little bit more at a higher valuation, etc. I think that as a founder, you are very, very protective of your company and the value and the hardship and everything that you put in it. But valuation is at the end of the day, it's just a figure out there. And if an accelerator, I mean, I think that there are also different types of accelerators. Both the accelerators I attended, neither of them took fixed equity, but we did fundraise. But what I was going to say is that at the end of the day, as long as you have a good accelerator and they're going to bring value to you, I wouldn't worry about the valuation, because even if you value your company very early on, let's say at 1 million, and the company takes 10%, if in 2 years' time you're at 10 million and you're raising 1 million, again it's 10%. So it really isn't important initially. I think if you dilute down to 50% initially, then you've got a problem. But other than that, I would not worry too much about that initial valuation. That's my view. John? Completely agree
with Simona, right? The way I look at it is more on the value creation of that accelerator program that you could actually potentially join, right? So it's not only from the fundraising side. I mean, there are a lot of tools and experience that was brought up by this accelerator program, be it from the growth, be it from the hiring. And I think it's very, very valuable, right? As a founder, and this is like they taught us on day one, right? So they said, you don't know what you don't know. So as a founder, sometimes we're stubborn. It's like, we would like to conquer the world. We know what we would like to do, but you always get blockage or hurdles along the way, right? And these programs are built in to basically help you to go through that process and to that journey as well. So I think you don't really, especially if you're in the super, super early stage, I don't think valuation matters or the equity that you're giving. I think like what Simon have mentioned is the value that you are taking from those accelerators is the most important part when you are actually doing a fundraising as well.
So you mentioned value. What do you mean by that? What type of value should someone be looking for?
I think, if you are applying for an accelerator program, values that probably you might ask yourself is like, how can I go from point A to point B? Be it, for example, from the fundraising side, if I join, for example, for accelerator program, will this actually move my company from point A to point B? It could be fundraising, it could be growth marketing, it could be hiring, it could be partnership, right? So those type of values, and not only that, aside from that, there's really like technological perks, like technology perks, right? So for instance, in our case, 500 Startup gave us almost $1 million worth of technology that we don't need to pay for 12 months. And we've been using it. We've been live for almost 24 months now. And until now, zero expense on the technology, be it on the email marketing, be it on the hosting side, all of those sorts of things. And that itself, if you convert that on a monetary, it's more than it's more than what they're taking from the equity perspective. So I guess that's how I say, or I deem value that accelerator program actually provides when you join into one.
Excellent.
Yeah. And I think, I was going to refer back to the programs that we did. You did the 500 startups. I did the Vision Ventures, Seed Stars, Growth Accelerator. They bring a lot of value in terms of mentoring. So access to people who've done it before, access to people who are special matter experts, access to investors, access to partners, and then on top of it, what John was just saying, also in terms of other, monetary value that they bring. I think there was a question in the Q&A, which was who are good accelerators? I wouldn't feel that I was in a position to advise which one is and which one is not. But I think that you can research them. There's some big names out there. You can, and it's also, of course, what's relevant to your industry. So some accelerators focus specifically on fintech. Some other ones focus on, tech only. Some other ones are much broader. So it really, really depends on sort of the industry that you're in. But I would certainly look at the program and assess the program and look at the trade-offs that are associated with it when you're applying to them. At the end of the day, it's also a luxurious position to be in, to be able to choose the accelerator, because as I said, there's thousands of startups who are all vying for funding, capital, access to mentors and so on. So it's also sometimes a question of what you can get. But I think there are some very, very good ones out there.
I think a lot of the time when we speak to startups, they feel like, but what if I fundraise? Like if I fundraise today before the accelerator at a $700,000 valuation or $1 million valuation, and then in 3 months after that, through the accelerator, I'm gonna grow, and I'm gonna have, like, the assumption is always I'm gonna grow and I'm gonna accelerate. So then they feel like they're scared that, and this has been a common question that we've received as well, is that they're scared that by that time, they're like, they can't increase their valuation too much because they had recently raised at a lower valuation. So how would you guys reflect on that, on raising the valuation compared to the frequency and the time duration between raises?
John, why don't you tackle it and I'll add.
Yeah, I think the way I look at it is basically setting expectations, especially if you've raised previously, right? So setting expectation from your previous investors, why you would be raising on a lower valuation and what value will be bringing in to the company, right? And I think that's the most important part. And I've seen this story as well, Amina, and the conversation is along the lines of more on agreeing on the, I would say, agreeing on the goal or the end goal that the company would like to do by joining the accelerator program, right? Or for instance, there are a couple of founders that have raised initially prior to a program like 500 startup, and then because it's a set fixed equity from 500 startup, and they would like to join, now the valuation that they do have is 3 times, 4 times better than by just doing alone, right? So not only from the valuation perspective, because accelerator program will tell you about what would be the best way to do fundraising, but there's another value that Simone and I have mentioned earlier as well.
I think again, there's a couple of distinctions here that I would draw on. One of them, I think, is depending on how early stage you are. I think that if you raised at a valuation, typically if you raised very early, I'm assuming that often it's family and friends. So I think if it's family and friends, I think it's not a big deal. In our case, actually, we had fundraised before we joined the program, and we were in the process of fundraising when we joined the program, and the accelerator wanted to give us a different valuation, but we stuck to where we were at, and actually they came in at our terms. So it's also a question, I don't think there's any right or wrong answer here. I think it's it depends on the situation and how you go, but typically I would say that the value creation from having an accelerator is usually very large. And in terms of sort of fundraising at in short periods of time. So if you were to fundraise and then 2 months later you're fundraising again, or you're entering a program and your valuation goes down, I would say it's not very serious because it's such a short period of time. If you're fundraising 2 months later and you are trying to negotiate a higher valuation, I think it's more difficult to justify, because unless you can prove what's changed within those 2 months, right? You did something 2 months ago, there was a valuation that was agreed, whoever it was, and 2 months later, you're trying to justify a much higher one. Now, it could be because you launched in the market, or it could be because you signed a very big strategic partner, or it could be because you have a very big strategic investor who's come on board and has said, I'm willing to give you this much. So there could be very valuable reasons. But in absence of that, and it's just the founder saying, hey, I want to raise at a higher valuation 2 months from now, I think it's quite a challenging sell.
Okay. You guys mentioned also the value that investors add, which is extremely important when considering an investor. But what about when that's used as a part of the bargaining or the negotiation of the valuation? Do you take into consideration? So for example, an investor would say, I can make this connection, so I would like to take a lower valuation. Did you guys face any of those types of conversations with investors?
I didn't face that one directly, but I faced a situation where the investors said, I'll put in some money now, and I'll put in some up. So I'm committing X amount, and I'm going to pay it over installments over the next 6 months based on milestones. And I said, no, I'm not taking that. Because that's, first of all, it's not really commitment, because it's based on milestones. Second of all, they're de-risking their investment compared to other investors who are doing it. So I said no to that. But the other one I haven't had, where they've said we'll give that connection. I think if that situation came to pass, it would depend on what was on offer, and it would depend, and I would structure it that I would only accept it, or whatever, we would only conclude the deal when that happens. Like, you would have to sort of negotiate those 2 points together, otherwise you could be left out in the cold.
Yeah.
This is an interesting question. So this one is actually not shared publicly, but actually we'll share it here, right? So just recently we received an offer from an investor, 2 things, right? One is to acquire the company plus the partnership. So we can only activate the partnership if we get acquired. And we said no. I guess that's completely different conversation. And from our perspective, the way we see it is, we would like, we'd like to build the company on a long term, and we're not ready to exit at the moment. But in the case of lower valuation in terms of partnership, I think you just need to sense the conviction and the commitment of the investor. I don't think, it depends on case based. I guess it depends on the situation. But if that happens to me, I don't see and sense that there will be a commitment from the investor. So I would even say no for that.
Have you ever seen, or have you witnessed where like it would be one round, but different investors would get different valuations because of different value adds, or is it always the same valuation across the board depending on the timing?
So for me, it's really interesting because the way we strategize, or the way we put a strategy in our fundraising during the early days of 500 startup, we leverage the program to position ourselves to position the company in a strong position, right? So we've done multiple fundraising until we reach the demo day. So each fundraising, I think the interval was actually 2 weeks or 3 weeks, because there's a lot of demand from the investors. Investors suggest what the valuation they would like to enter, and that's what we did, right? So every 3 weeks until we reach the demo day, the company increased its value, significantly.
Okay. I want some stories. So tell us about some investor meetings that were where you were surprised, or like a really odd investor meeting, like, and how did you deal with it? Any significant stories you guys would like to share with investor meetings? Or like, I have one that maybe I can share. So I've also raised a certain, like we did a fundraise, and a lot of the times when like you would meet with investors, a commitment wouldn't be like, I think that often us as founders, when you see someone that's interested, you instantly think it's a commitment, you know, and then the commitment doesn't actually happen unless you have the money in the bank. Sometimes they might even sign the KISS note or the SAFE note, but then it's not an actual commitment until the amount is in the bank. So we had a case where we actually extended a few of our trips to meet with certain investors that were very keen, that were very excited, and then we met with them, we signed the KISS, and then they suddenly disappeared, you know. So so it happens a lot where these types of things would happen. So were there any investor meetings or any instances that happened with you guys that you'd like to share?
So I think another tip that sort of comes out of your story, Amina, or not a tip, but it's getting to a no as fast as possible. So what I have experienced is that the majority of investors don't really want to say no. And I don't know whether they don't want to say no because they want to see what happens. You all of a sudden, you know, you raise a lot of money and then they get a FOMO, or is it because it's just culturally not okay to say no, or they just don't know. So you waste a lot of time on those conversations. And I think that finding a way to take control of that is really valuable, and is a big tip I would give to founders. I don't necessarily think I've perfected it, but I think that by having, so if you're in a situation like John was, where you've got a huge demand, that's a very different situation. You control the terms. If you're in a situation where, you know, you're starting out, or it's, you know, it's still early stages, so on, you don't have that control. But if you can create a sense, or if you can find a way to make people tell you no, it's incredibly invaluable to you. And trying to put deadlines, fictitious deadlines don't really work. That would be my say on that as well. But what you can, but you can put a deadline. If you just want to get to know, you can put a deadline and say that if you don't get back to me by whatever day next month, then you're out, and you take that decision that they're out and you move on. I think that that's very beneficial to you as a founder, because it'll make you find other options.
Okay, interesting. John, do you have any tips on how to kind of speed up the no?
I think like it's common when talking to founders, these challenges of not getting the right answer from the investor, either they would like to commit or not, right? The best example is basically putting a deadline. That's the best way. And because of fundraising, when you put a process in place, you would need to set deadline for those processes, right? And that would be the best way for you to mitigate or to get the answer as quickly as possible from the investors.
Okay. How much does this fundraising need to be planned at an early stage? So do you really need to set a structure, and I want to do this many rounds at this thing? How do you even plan that? How do you approach that as a founder for the first time? Or how did you guys?
So obviously you need to, so especially when you're very early stage, you need to have a vision, because that's what's going to really excite investors or get them on board. You need to have a vision. You need to have a plan of where you're going. It might change 500 times. I mean, there's millions of stories of big companies that have had to pivot and have done completely different stuff. So, but you need to, when you're fundraising, you need to have a vision, and you need to be clear on why you're going there, what you're going. And in that vision, you need to come up with a business plan. And in that business plan, you need to have some views about how your business would evolve if everything would come to pass. And then based on that, you then know how much money in principle you would need. And then based on that, you come up with what your funding strategy could be. So I can't say that we had a very strong vision. We knew we needed money. Getting that first money is not an easy task. And if you're in a lucky position where you have money coming to you, that's great. But I think the reality of most of the founders that I've ever spoken to is, you know, that first fundraise is really difficult.
Definitely. How about you, John? How did you approach that, or plan to fundraise? How did you approach it?
Well, for us Simon already have mentioned. I think, just to reiterate, like you need to make sure you have a problem to solve. What is, how big is this problem, and what is your solution, and how big is the market, right? So all of those fundamentals, and then you have the narrative of the vision that you would like to say, that you tell to the investors. If you are, depending on the stage of your company, if you are super early stage, team and the team factors a lot, because when you're building a company, like what again Simona mentioned, there's a different ways of building a company, right? There might be a multiple pivot, right? But the question is actually how the team structured and persevere to accomplish those goals that they would like to solve, the problem that they would like to solve. In our case, from the preparation before or during the program, it took us 4 months to prepare for it, right? So the first thing that we need to do is making sure that the business model is actually spot on. We have the story to tell. We know our business. We know the numbers. The second one is basically practice the pitch, right? So we've done this, like we pitch 20 times a day to make sure that we memorize basically what we're saying, and there's a benefit for that, right? The benefit for that is actually it brings confidence automatically when you start pitching, because you don't forget about what you want to say on the pitch. And then after that would be your data room, right? So preparing your data room, even in the early stage, we're not really, it's not the most detailed data room that we do have, but it's just more on like the market research that we have done, the financial projections in the next 12 months, who are the team, what are their backgrounds, the problem and the solutions, and then we have the technology itself. Once we have those things in place, we start, the next step is actually reaching out to investors within the network, right? So the best way for us when we were doing our first investment round was actually getting an introduction from fellow founders, from VCs that we know, and schedule a meeting with them. So those one took us for 4 months because we leveraged the startup program. It's a completely different journey. It's a completely different process now as we, for example, doing a fundraising for our Series A, right? So it's much more longer. It takes around 6 months preparation. You have the numbers that you would like to work on now, making sure that the numbers are right. You make sure you need to know how to, explain your numbers, and they're much more scrutinized in terms of business model of the company that you're building.
Okay. You guys, so you both mentioned the importance of having a clear vision. Now, a lot of the time, fundraising is very confusing. You go to a meeting, they give you feedback. You go to another meeting, they tell you something completely different. And then 2-3 months into fundraising, you find yourself changing your vision to suit what investors want you to say. So what's your reflection of on that?
I think in my case, again, the accelerator helped a lot in terms of perfecting that pitch. And in that process, you do get challenged on your vision. So you actually come out of that with a relatively strong and confident vision. Yeah, I think that's thing. One of the things I think you're going to come to, but this is slightly off tangent to your question, but I think it's very, very relevant, which is around getting your first investor on board and sort of tips on the investors. There's different investor types, and I think that that's a really important point for founders. We very early on went to VCs, very early on, and it was too early. They all say no. And in hindsight, of course they were going to say no. It was too early. So going back to how do you fundraise and what's the process and so on, what I would recommend founders doing is I would recommend them finding angels. And there's lots of angel networks in different countries. So in here, there's the Dubai angels, in Saudi, there's the Riyadh angels, the Saudi angels, etc. So there's angel networks all over. And I would not pitch them for money. I would ask them for a coffee, and I would go and have a coffee with them. And having a coffee with them, I would ask them for advice, and I wouldn't ask them for money. And 3 months later, if you've established a rapport or whatever, you might be able to go and ask them for money. Or at that point, they might already know that you need money and might be active. But that's something I would definitely do differently. And it would have saved me lots of hours of wasted time pitching to VCs.
Interesting. And how long does it take to build that like with you guys? So we hear this a lot: build a relationship with the investor, build a relationship with the investor. How do you guys recommend someone goes about that for someone who doesn't know any angels, that doesn't have any connections, that can make an introduction? You know, it's just someone on their computer in their office. How do they approach that to even start a conversation, to be able to build a relationship?
I can give you my view. I don't know, John, whether you want to take it.
Carry on, Simona.
All right. So I think that there's different ways. First of all, if you know, you can always reach out to fellow founders. Fellow founders are usually a wealth of idea, experience, and in most cases are willing to share because they at some point have been mentored too. So reaching out to fellow founders, seeing if they know anyone, seeing if they can intro you, seeing if how they went about it. So that would be one tip. Another tip is, you know, Googling. So if you would just Google angel investor, Dubai, whatever, you'd come across Dubai angel investors, and then you'd go into Dubai angel investors and you'd see all the list of people who either are part of the board or who are members or whatever. And then you can either go onto LinkedIn and you see if you've got any connections, or you find out what information you can about those people, and then you approach them with the angle that would be relevant for them. So in my case, one of our investors is Mindshift Capital. Mindshift Capital is a female-led VC. You know, we met Heather very early on because we had quite a few things that were relevant. So we met Heather, we were talking, like, so I think it's the same way as you're going to approach a VC ultimately, because a VC, you have to approach the right VC that's relevant for your business. And that, like, otherwise you're wasting everyone's time. Yeah,
interesting. How about you, John? How would you say someone should approach investors for the first time and start building that communication and relationship?
I guess it's building this relationship starts from not asking money, right? So I think for me, the way I see it is, you know, just don't be afraid to ask questions, right? So this is a real life experience from my side. I just went to LinkedIn, look who are the top international money transfer, either globally, locally, or regionally, right? And then I just reached out to, for example, the CEO of Toons, which is a $1 billion company out of Singapore. And I said, hey, we're building something in the region. What do you think about it? And you know, after 2 weeks, all of a sudden they replied, and then we set a meeting. And again, we're building a relationship, and it's not only Toons, right? So, you know, maybe my tip is basically go to the industry where you are focusing on and look who are the subject expert matter, and then ask for the opinion, pitch your idea. Don't be afraid of sharing your idea. Probably there might be, you know, better way to shape your ideas or your company. I mean, ultimately build the relationships, you know, early on before even fundraising, right? Because you never know whether this angel investor or these people that you're talking to now could be your first money into your company. So it's very, very important. No expectation set, but you know, I think that would be most likely could happen as well.
And yeah, I think there was a really good point that John mentioned there, which is something again that sort of resonates with me, is don't be afraid about sharing your idea. I think that's something we were worried about, sharing our idea. And at the end of the day, an idea is something that's out there. It's how you execute it that actually is a differentiator. It's not the idea per se, usually.
Good point. We get this a lot, like when we have programs for people to register to, and the application form would say, I'm not going to share my idea, call me. Or, you know, so people are very protective of their ideas. It is a very common sentiment everywhere, I think. And you guys mentioned that there's different types of investors, different ways to approach them, but then does the duration of getting that investment also vary from that one investor type to another? So from an angel versus a VC, how does the process differ from one versus the other?
Yeah, well, I think it links back to what John was saying as well about stage. So if you're a Series A, there's very different documentation, there's lots of lawyers are involved and so on. I think if you're doing a KISS or a SAFE or convertible note, you know, they're relatively standard. Once they're relatively standard, then, you know, in our case, I'm just trying to think, we had the due diligence carried out by most of the angels was relatively limited. The due diligence carried out by the institutional investors was more thorough and more in depth, so it takes longer with the institutional.
Okay.
There's also different approvals, right? It has to go to the investment committees, has to be approved, etc. Whereas with an angel, it's an individual typically deciding.
And what types of documentations are required? So for example, let's go from like angel, accelerator, and then VC, just to compare how that would be. So maybe we can start with the angels with Simona and then move to the accelerators with John to see how the documentations differ. So what type of documents would an angel request?
My internet is relatively unstable, but let me try. I'll just stop my video for a minute, so maybe that will help. I don't think that there's a standard about what an angel will request. We prepared, as John said, a relatively simple data room that was we gave access to the angels. It included the legal documentation, it included a business plan, it included a couple of key contracts, etc. What was required from the institutional investors was more detailed. We were required to give bank transfers, not just show the cap table, but show the actual commitments. I think that there were quite a few more sort of legal requirements that were asked for versus the angels.
Simona, what is a data room for those who might be unaware?
A data room is just somewhere where you're going to store documents that will be relevant to anyone who's considering investing in your company. So typically people want to make sure that you really are a real company, so that you have a license and that you're incorporated somewhere. They want to make sure that the assets of your company, whether they're tech assets or IP assets or whatever, really belong to the company that they're going to invest in. They want to know what your company was set out to do. So, you know, when you signed your articles of association or whatever it is, your memorandum, that is indeed, you're not a company that's doing something completely different to what you said you were doing. And then they want to see your financials. They want to see that you're not lying, that what you said you've actually made in revenues is indeed what you've actually made. And they validate that against bank statements. So those would be some of the things that you could envisage seeing. Their key commercial contracts. Yeah.
When you say financials, what type of financials? Do they need to be audited financials? We're talking about cash flow, balance sheet. What type of financials would they request?
I think it depends really on the stage again that you're at. So in our case, we did not need to have audited financials. So we just gave our, you know, the P&L and the balance sheet as they were. But as I said, they did ask for bank statements to make sure that the cash kind of reflected what we were saying as well. So I think it depends on, again, the stage of a company you're at.
John, how would you compare that to the experience of getting money from an accelerator or from a program?
I mean, it's pretty much almost the same. probably from the VC or from, I could add up on the VC. I mean, I think from the VC, like what Simona mentioned, it's much more thorough and it's much more detailed. From the financial side, for instance, when we were raising our early stage investment round, they require us an audited financial statement, which we already have, utilization of the investment. Just want to make sure that we're clear of how we would like to use the money, and up to how many months or how long it will take that money to go for the next round, right? So the data room, everything is actually will be there, but it's much more detailed information that requires for VC compared to angels, right? Angels probably, if you already have an existing relationship with an angel, it could be a pitch deck and your grand story that you'll conquer the world, right? So, but for the VC, this needs to actually show from the data room itself when they start reading and saying, okay, then this makes sense for them to, to be seeing this data room to basically raise this amount of investment round or money. So to answer your question, Amina, it's much more thorough. There are you might want to add a lot of FAQs as well in the data room for VCs, and collect all those questions from other VCs or other angels. So basically, it becomes a repository of every single thing that's happened in their company and the company structure and the team, and all other legal documents.
That's actually an interesting document that I've never seen in any data room. So I'm interested in that, the Q&A. I think because the questions are so repetitive, that's such a good tip. So could you guys give examples of very common repeated questions that investors do ask at an early stage, let's say, for example? Maybe John, you want to give us some examples for early stage?
Yeah, I think common questions like differentiation of your company to the others, right? This is a common question. Market sizing, acquisition, right? From the technology perspective, how do you build? Because for us, we're in a very complex industry. We are on a fintech or financial industry, regulatory, right? Whenever they ask, where are you regulated? So these are common questions that by just putting the FAQ, it simplifies the conversation. And by the way, just to add up on these things, data room, my advice should not be shared as earlier the conversation. You try to push the data room at the end, or at least once there's already a commitment. And because this is one of the mistakes that we had from the past, where it's like the data room is accessible by anyone, shared, giving to everyone, and we cannot control the momentum of the conversation, right? So one tip on that one is basically share only the data room when you see or feel that there's a commitment from the other side.
Okay, nice. How about you, Simona? What are common questions?
So John has just reminded me of something that was relevant in my previous life, because in my previous life I was in M&A and I did lots of I did data rooms. I actually prepared them and I actually visited them, and we used to do FAQs, and I haven't done it for my one. So very good. I'm going to add that now to our data room. Yeah, I mean, competition is always a question we get asked. Business model is also a question we get asked. So there are a lot of repetitive questions. Yeah, market sizing. How did you define the addressable market? So those are all really good questions. I'm gonna take that tip and I'm gonna do it myself. So thanks for that.
Yeah, I like that idea, John. Honestly, it's gonna save so much time. So now I think like you guys already mentioned that, valuation at an early stage doesn't really matter that much, but then it's still, no matter how much we hear that, it's still scary for a founder. How do I approach it? What is the right value for my company? So how does a founder approach valuation to start with? Is there an equation for that? Is it just a percentage? Is it pure negotiation? So for early stage, how do founders approach valuation?
So first of all, I would say to early stage investors to make sure that they do a SAFE, or they do a a KISS, and the whole purpose of those documents was in principle to get away from evaluation. The way that they're used, though, is that there's a cap in it, so people actually attribute that as a valuation. So it's a bit of a catch-22. I think that, again, like everything, you need to have a rationale as to why you've come up with a particular valuation. So you can look at any data that you have about comparables. So if there's another company that's doing something similar to you, you can see what they're, how they're currently valued. What are the multiples compared to the revenues? Like, you can look at that. You can do a discounted cash flow based on your financial model. You can look at lifetime value of customers. Basically, you can come up with any valuation you want under the sun, as long as you have a good rationale as to why you've come up with it. I think that from there, anyhow, it's just a matter of negotiation, because you could have come up very, very reasonably with a valuation, let's say, of 10 million, because for whatever reason you've come up with it. And if no one in the market is willing to to invest in you at 10 million, but they're willing to invest in you at 2 million, by definition, if you need the money, you're going to come down to the 2 million. But what you need from your perspective is you need to be clear about why you came up with that figure in the first place.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, I was watching a YouTube video the other day, and it was about how numbers need to, like, you need to, if you're a numbers person, you need to attach it with a story, and if you're a story person, you need to attach it with numbers. And it's just about how with valuation, you're just selling the story and then backing it up with those numbers. So that's definitely a very good point. John, how would you recommend approaching evaluation?
Completely agree. There's a lot of ways to do the valuation. Right? We know companies, outside the region, within the region, that actually have raised higher valuation with nothing, which is a technology, which is an idea, right? Some actually have post transactions ready, or having some transactions with a lower valuation. My take on this one is personally, if you're doing a fundraising and if you're talking to probably VC, let them get some advice of how would they value the company, right? It's not necessarily that you will be taking that one, but to give you an idea, especially if you don't have anything to support with about the valuation, right? So this is something that we have done, right? And that's the reason when we were in the program, again, just repeating on myself, this valuation didn't come from us. This valuation was actually introduced to us on how they think the value of the company. And then we come to the position of strength to negotiate from that valuation. So if you can find the ways, especially like an investor that would really have a conviction or interest in your company, let them help you to put in place how to value your company. I think that would be how I would put into that one, because I mean there's no right or wrong valuation. I guess it's up to you how much you want to get diluted, right? And how important for you again the value that they'll be bringing in, and doing solo as a founder, building your own company.
I think we talked a lot about what investors would ask us, but what are questions that we are supposed to ask investors? Any tips on that?
I think for me, first thing is actually what do they think about the industry we're in, and that's really important. One is they know the industry, or there's really an interest, right? I don't, and again, this is something that's like I've learned from my mistakes when I was doing my first investment. Was I just keep pitching. I don't know, the investor's profile. It was just like given to us, like go there, pitch, see if you can actually do a fundraising, and it's like completely different mindset. And what we've learned during the program, it's more on the mindset, and especially this is true for the founders. I would like to advise that when you go out there and do a fundraising, your mindset should not be begging for money or asking for money. Your mindset should be you're giving an opportunity for VC to work with you and solve this problem that you would like to solve. So the questions that I always ask are two things, right? So it's like, what do you think about the industry? And after that, all the follow-on questions from that main topic. So instead of them asking me about the market, which is a very repetitive, which they can see in the pitch deck, I threw the questions on the other hand, which is making sure that they, asking questions that they know the fintech or the space we are working with.
Okay, interesting. Simona, what are questions that you ask from investors? So I think definitely knowing if they know the sector is important, and it would guide the valuation and guide the conversation and all of that. But what about you, Simona? What questions would you ask?
So I think before you're going to approach the investor, my advice would be to know where they typically like to invest in, so that you're pitching to the right people, and that when you pitch to them, that you have insight about the types of investments that they've done, and you tailor your pitch to link to that. I think that definitely helps you create a stronger pitch for that investor. If I'm pitching to investors that I know typically invest in this sector, I have also usually checked out what portfolio companies they've invested in, because and I either know the portfolio companies, or I already know how those portfolio companies might add value to me. So I actually pitched to an investor not so long ago, and I wasn't fundraising. I wasn't fundraising at that moment in time, but I left the call with introductions to a very big strategic partner, and I left the call with introductions to all to like 4 of their portfolio companies. So that was very beneficial for me. So what I think I would ask investors is, what role do they typically play in with their portfolio companies? What value do they bring? So you can almost, I would phrase it slightly differently, but I was like, okay, how do you support your portfolio companies? Some companies are very, very hands-on. Other ones just want, quarterly reports. I would see how, again, coming back to getting them interested, almost the FOMO, what strategic value do they think that they could bring to you? Because you're at present, you're looking for investors, you're in discussions with quite a few of them, and you're looking to see who would make a good partner for you. So you almost flip it around, that you're not sure about them. So why would they be a good fit for you?
Good point. It's always good to feel like it's always good to go into that negotiation with that confidence and feeling like you have that upper hand. What are some investor red flags? Like, what are some things that if you see, or you khalas, run the other way?
Installments, like what's your mention?
The installments.
What did you say?
Investing in installments.
Yeah, definitely not. What would I run away from? I think that integrity is something that for me is on a personal level super important. So I think that if I have an investor that either would change terms of a term sheet and not highlight it to me, or would do anything that I would feel was not right, then that would be a complete utter no for me. And I think that if there's a bad reputation in the market, so if if you're in the fundraising or you're in the market, you will hear about other investors, and you can make up your own minds whether you think that they would be the types of investors that you think you'd like to work with.
Okay. John?
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I mean, similar to what VC is doing, like they talk to each other, founders talk to founders as well. So I think the most important part is the value that they said that they can provide post investment, and the reputation itself. I think that's very, very important. That's why, and it's also a good practice to do a due diligence to the investor that you would like to be putting on the cap table, right? So talk to the existing founders that they've invested in, what do they think about the VCs. So those are the common ones as well. Yeah.
We'll take a question from the Q&A. Someone's asking, what are the factors or attributes that investors look for in a business or an investment opportunity? And does it matter if they don't have a team or if they don't have a co-founder? So how would you guys answer each question?
There's a lot in there. From the VC
Go ahead.
From the VC perspective, it depends on the VC that you're talking to. What are their investment theses? So, for example, if you talk to a corporate, a VC that mainly focus only on fintech, right? So most likely they'll invest only in the fintech and not other industry, right? And I think you will hear this if you are fundraising now, or if you've done fundraising, you might probably hear a lot of we are an industry agnostic, right? Which means they can invest in any sector. Everyone kind of say that from the VC perspective because they just want to see and know about your company. But the best way to look at that one is to their previous investments, right? So have they really invested into fintech? Have they really invested into the e-commerce? So that I would say very specific. The other question is, does it really matter if you have other co-founder? Again, it's case-to-case basis. We know some founders become very, very successful as a solo founder. But I guess one of the challenges that we do have, and I'm very vocal about this in our region, is we're still pretty much new in terms of investing, right? So it's a completely different game in terms of investment in Southeast Asia, for example, or in the US. So I think we're in the stage where we have these like fundamentals whereby in order for you to be investable, you need to have two founder, at least two or more. You need to have a working product, at least a little bit of traction. I think there are more and more, again, optionality of program, VC, and angels that could actually, provide interest on what you do, be it you are a pre-product, be it a solo founder, from the investment perspective. Simona, what do you think?
So what was the first part of the question? The second one was about founder. What was the first part?
Like, what do investors look for? What are the factors that determine an investor's interest in a business?
Okay. So I think it's definitely about the founder and the founding team. So early stage, pre-revenue, it's really about the team and the vision and the idea. It's about the sector, in the sense that do they believe that it's a big enough market? Are you solving a genuine problem? So is there a genuine problem that you're solving? Is the market big enough? Who are the people who are going to drive this forward? And do we believe that that team really could actually execute this? I think those are the three things I would say on that one. On the founding team, we're 3 co-founders, which has raised eyebrows. Equally, I know many single founders that said that people won't invest in them because they're single founders. From my personal experience as a founder, I'm so happy that at least I have co-founders, because you share the weight and you share the load and you share the celebrations. And I find that for us that's worked out really well. I would say though, if you have the wrong co-founder, that probably is even more problematic than having no co-founder.
Yeah, definitely. Closing words, closing tips for those considering fundraising. Any tips, final tips you guys would like to share?
Sure, I can go first. So I would definitely go with the adage, ask for advice, not money. If you ask for money, you'll get advice. And if you ask for advice, you might get money. So that would be one of my tips. My other tip is don't believe the hype. Every single one of those headlines, the magnet, everywhere it was a hard slog. I don't care which industry you are. It was a hard slog. I would say that I would definitely say early stage, try angels. I don't take just one approach. Try angels. You can try VCs as well. Try the accelerators. Like, don't take one approach. Try multiples, because one of them will work. And I think that leverage sort of your founder network to get ideas. You know, ask for advice. Like, how would you approach it? What would you do? Do you know which investors do you recommend? Who is it? And I think that those would be my top tips.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Simona. John?
I think from my side, just to add what Simona mentioned, I think it's all about the mindset. You're not asking for money, you're not begging for money. It's an opportunity for the VCs, for the angels to work with you, right? So you need to go out there and be confident. Practice is very, very important. It will do a lot of amazing things if you know, like, the business by heart, if it's the early stage. Ask for help. It's very, very important. You know, building a company is a very lonely journey, right? Ask for other founders. Ask for ask advice. Talk to other founders as well in the industry. Everyone, different sizes, different stages. All of us kind of been there, done that. So don't be afraid to ask for help and ask for opinion or ideas. So I guess that will be my advice. And I guess last one is, raising money is not a success metric, right? So don't think that if you raise $1 million or $2 million means that you're already successful. It just gives you a firepower, I would say, or an opportunity to work on the problem that you want to solve. So there's a responsibility that they're giving to you, and making sure that you use that, you capitalize that in the most right way. As a founder, we're rooting to all the founders here, and good luck.
Thank you so much, Simona and John. We really appreciate this. Thank you, everyone, for attending. Follow us on our Instagram page, HopeFundBH, for more of these sessions.